Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, a nature and wildlife photographer based in Northern California. And hopefully you enjoy the improved audio quality today. We're trying out a new mic setup, and hopefully it deals with some of my audio issues I've had in the past. Today I wanted to talk about something pretty straightforward. When doing wildlife photography, for example, shooting birds in the field with the 400mm f4.5, a wonderful lens offered on Z-mount with Nikon, does it make sense to use the teleconverter? Now, this is something that's, talked about a lot in the forums, but I really wanted my own evidence for this because this is something I deal with a lot in the field. Just a few examples I wanted to share with you up front, just to give you a feel for the type of photos I've been getting with this combination. This is a great horned owl that I photographed in the hills near San Francisco, outside on East Bay. And this photo was shot wide open at f4.5. These are types of situations where you have very low light and you have to shoot wide open pretty much. And you'll notice it's at 1/20th of a second. So it's a pretty long exposure for this type of situation. There's no way I'd use a teleconverter in this type of situation because I'm looking for as much light as humanly possible. Another example with the combination wide open at 400mm f4.5 is this bobcat that I shot out in Marin. And in this situation, again, looking at 400mm, in this case, not because of available light, but because the subject was so close to me. This particular bobcat had no fear of humans and could be a bit of an issue. And it was right next to me. So because it was so close, 400mm focal length was basically as long as I could possibly use and was perfectly suited for this situation. But there have been plenty of situations where I'm shooting smaller birds in the field where I absolutely need to either heavily crop, going close to 100% crops, or I need to use a teleconverter, still with a little bit of a crop. So this song sparrow that I found on kind of a cloudy day, I love this shot. I love the action of it, but this was shot with the 1.4x teleconverter, and you can see it's very sharp and a very good image. Another example of this, and here is a red-tailed hawk that I found. It was on a post, so it was easier to get a little bit more thoughtful about the shot. This is another example where I shot with the 1.4x at 560mm, and you can see here the 100% crop. Very, very, very good detail, very sharp image. So look, there's no question here that you can get sharp images with and without the teleconverter with this combination. If all you're here to do is sort of see whether or not this is a good combination, whether it's worth investing in the 1.4x, I'd say it is a very strong combination. I have very little issues with it. And it's certainly a good idea to have a teleconverter when you have a shorter focal length like this, if you're shooting a smaller subject like a bird or something like that. But I wanted to get a little bit more clinical in my evaluation because for me, I want to know kind of when to use this kit. And I thought it might be helpful for you too to understand when to use the teleconverter and also to what extent you need to stop it down to match the sharpness of the lens without the teleconverter. So let's get into a little bit more of the detail here with some test charts that I shot. So here's my test chart. I put this together. I'm kind of happy with this one. In the background, you can see one of my shots from Yosemite, and then we've got some of these photos from the field that I've taken, as well as some of the targets that'll give you a feeling for the center as well as the edge image sharpness. So I shot these images from 25 feet, which may seem like a lot, but it's not unusual for me to be shooting a small bird from about that distance. I'm looking at ISO 64, so minimal noise possible. The lowest ISO, base ISO on this camera, the Z8. And I'm using a tripod to adjust the exposure time so that I can get an image based on whatever my f-stop is. So the first example I wanted to look at and share with you is the comparison of the wide open sharpness. We're looking at, on the left, the 400mm f4.5 with 100% crop, and on the right we're looking at the teleconverter added and wide open at f6.3, in this case with the 71% crop, which is what you need to adjust it so that's the same field of view. And here I was a little bit surprised, I'll be honest. In the field I've noticed, I thought I had noticed that maybe the teleconverter was suffering from a little bit of sharpness, but at least in this type of controlled environment where you're holding the camera still on a tripod, I don't see much difference with these crops. You can interpret this both ways. These are center crops, so I'll show you a little bit more detail in a second. But I think what this says to you is that if you need the 400 millimeter f4.5, whether because you need that shorter focal length or because you want more light, then it's fine to use that combination and to crop. If you do want more reach though, and you want the ability to crop into your image further when using the teleconverter, what this says to me is that I wouldn't be too concerned about cropping in on the image even wide open when using the teleconverter, because at least in the center, the image sharpness is very good. So let's look a little bit more at the mid-frame and the edges image quality. So we're looking at the same two combinations, the 400 4.5 and the 400 4.5 with the teleconverter, both wide open. In the mid-frame, I see pretty comparable sharpness again to what I saw in the center. There isn't really a noticeable difference in these images. If anything, it almost looks like the teleconverter image is maybe a tad bit sharper. You can see a little bit more definition in like the numbers here compared to here. So, I mean, you know, this could be issues with the images I shot. I took 3 images in every example that I took, and I took the sharpest one of the 3. But yeah, you know, you could have some variance here in the sample, but either way, it's quite comparable in the mid frame as well as the center. Where we see a little bit more difference is in the edge. Now it's definitely clear to me that when looking at the corners here, the 400 4.5 wide open, 100% crop is sharper than the teleconverter. So we are seeing the effect of the teleconverter, particularly in the corners. It's a little bit more blurry here. There's no question there's more definition, clarity, and sharpness in the bare lens without the teleconverter. So next I wanted to look at comparable apertures. So here what we're looking at is the same crops so that we can look a little bit more in detail, but we're looking at a 400 millimeter f6.3 versus the 560 millimeter f6.3. So we've got wide open, but then we've stopped it down. So this would be a scenario where you can afford to stop down the lens to f6.3 and you can shoot, but you're really more concerned about the focal length. And in this situation, again, I'm not seeing a big difference in the center. And this really speaks to the strength of the teleconverter and the performance with the 400 millimeter lens. So in the center, image quality is very, very similar between the two. If anything, it's slightly sharper with the teleconverter, but very, very, very similar. When we stop down to f8 on the 400 millimeter, here we're finally starting to see a little bit of a difference here. I think the 400 millimeter is ever so slightly sharper when cropped compared to using the teleconverter, but the image quality is very, very similar once again. Once we've stopped down to f8, that difference that we saw in the corners, so the 400 millimeter f8 here just cropped versus the teleconverter on the right. At f8, we finally see that the teleconverter image has sharpened up, and I think we're almost comparable quality in the corners. I still think the 400 millimeter without the teleconverter is a bit sharper in the corners, but it's much, much more comparable once you stop down the teleconverter image to a teleconverter combination to f8. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today. Those are my results. A couple takeaways that I would take from that. It's sort of, you can cut it both ways. On the one hand, when you need to have that versatility to shoot at f4.5, whether that's because you're shooting low light situations like with owls, like I shared, or whether you're in the field and you just don't want to have to put on a teleconverter, I wouldn't worry too much about cropping in on these images up to about 100%. I mean, these images are very sharp. The performance of the 400 millimeter is very, very good. And you certainly can crop into images to get that additional, focus on your subject and to crop out some of the extraneous things that come when we're shooting small animals or small birds. Using the teleconverter is a bit of a mixed bag. In the center, for center image quality, and even in the mid frame, there isn't much of a difference. I'm not seeing much benefit to stopping down. There is some benefit perhaps, but it's not that pronounced. And it certainly is comparable image quality to the 400 with bare without the teleconverter. So in a situation where the subject is pretty far away, as long as you don't have heat haze or other issues like that, I actually think it's fine to use the teleconverter. You're going to get a smaller field of view. You're going to get a little bit closer to your subject, and you can even crop a little bit further on top of that. Where it does suffer a little bit is in those edges, the edge quality, and that sort of makes sense, I suppose, because you're sort of magnifying it in an interesting way when using a teleconverter, and it is going to magnify some flaws that you have maybe in the image circle on the 400 millimeter. So it's possible there's some weird thing going on there where the mid frame and the center are kind of equal quality, but the edges become a little bit less sharp. So shooting wide open, there is a difference in image quality in the edges, and then once you drop down to about f8, you see kind of a comparable level of image quality. So if shooting landscapes or something like that, probably better off either shooting bare or stopping down your exposure, your f-stop, so that you're about f8, maybe f9. So the end results here are a little bit less dramatic than I thought they would be. Probably that's a good thing. What that indicates is that the teleconverter is performing really well on the 400 millimeter, and that there isn't much reason not to use the teleconverter if that's something you need to use to get the focal length that you're looking for. It's also, remember, going to increase your maximum magnification because the minimum focus distance of the lens is not going to change when you put the teleconverter, but your focal length will, your effective focal length. So because of that, you're going to have a larger subject and you're going to be able to increase your maximum magnification on the lens. So overall, it's a good investment, I think, to get the teleconverter. I do think if money is not an issue, then this is a situation where you have to ask yourself, do I want the versatility of the 400 f4.5, or do I expect to always be out at that 560 millimeter range and even cropping further? Because if you're always out at 560 with the teleconverter on this lens, you might want to consider the 600 PF, which is going to give you 600 millimeters at f6.3, plus the versatility of adding the 1.4 to that lens to get to 840 millimeters. And that exact issue is one of the things that I'm kind of wrestling with right now, is whether or not this lens makes sense or whether I should be shooting the 600 millimeter. I think based on the subjects I shoot, because I do shoot things like bobcats and coyotes and badgers when I can find them, these larger, maybe medium-sized mammals, because of that, having a 400 millimeter or maybe adding a zoom, the 100 to 400, makes the most sense for me. But if I were just shooting small birds or birds in flight, I think I'd probably look at the 600 millimeter as a kind of ideal middle ground lens between that 400 and 800 millimeter focal length. So I hope these examples were helpful for you. It was helpful for me, I got to be honest with you, because I've been kind of wrestling with this myself. I think I'm not going to worry about using the teleconverter in the field going forward. So take care, be well, and see you in the next video, and don't forget to get outside. Bye.